time, I'm going to try to demonstrate how I utilize plugins for my drum covers. And I'm going to focus on my snare EQ and compression as a question from Adam AR Drummer. And I'm also going to show you a few of my tricks for kicks, overhead, and my master bus compressor, hopefully. So let's get started. Let's start with, we're using Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. So this is a pre-recorded track. It's actually been released on YouTube. And I just want you guys to hear the track playing. Now, when the snare comes in, I'm going to focus on the whole thing. This is without master bus EQ, and presently I have EQs in place for the snare. So let's go to the snare, because this is what the question was from Adam, was what's my EQ for the snare? Well, my first EQ for the snare is, and this is my starting point, is refresh snare. Now, this is actually how I dialed it in for this particular song. So the refresh snare has a much higher EQ on the 10K and the 4K, the 5K area. But one of the things I want to say about this level of snare EQ is I boost a little bit at 200, and then I pull out a lot at 500. So it's saying minus 5.8. This is subjective to my ears. I use my ears to kind of dial things in. If I take that out, you can hear a little more honkiness in the snare. So listen to that a little bit. A little honkier. So what I'm going to do is now put that back in. It takes a little bit of the honk out. Pulls out the honky frequencies. That's a big thing to me. So that's the refresh snare. The next EQ I utilize is the Pultec EQ. This is a UAD plugin. I have a suite of UAD plugins. It's one of my favorites. And this one I'm using the snare punch as the starting point. This is where I ended up. So snare punch looks like this. Quite a different snare punch, to be honest, from where we ended up. Where we ended up, I pulled out a lot of boost, pulled it back a little bit, put a lot more attenuation. Now, one of the interesting things about this plugin is boost and attenuation actually work together. So a lot of times when you have an attenuator, you're going to take out the boost. But this plugin allows you to use boost and attenuation together, and it gets some really interesting effects. See, I took out the whole boost. And it really works really well. It's kind of a really cool feature. Same thing with the high end. Now we're in the breakdown. So let me go back a little bit. We'll go back to the, let's slap it in at 6. There we go. So you hear the snare. So I kind of listen until I feel like I found the spot I wanted at. So let's see if I'm at Mary again. There's that. I went a little past it. All right, so that's the second plugin. Now this is my Real Magic plugin, by the way. This is my Transit Designer. This is another UAD plugin. And this plugin right here, you take it out, you're not hearing as much attack. If you want to hear that attack, it's coming from here. Now this is the sustain. See how I kind of took the sustain out of that snare drum? Usually I don't put a lot of sustain in the snare drum, but if I want to have that ballady snare sound and I want to have more reverb picking it up, you want to have the sustain in it. So I put the sustain in. This is the attack end. If you take the attack out, it has no punch. All sustain. So that's one of those, that's a really important plugin for me. And the last plugin is the compressor. and it catches all the hits, the hard hits, and then gain matches it. So that's the snare drum. All right. Now, really, my sound a lot of times... Oh, I forgot the reverb. Let me put that back in for a second. This is really where I start to dial it in, is the reverb. That's my main reverb. That's the main reverb. And then we have the secondary reverb, which is the snare reverb. And I'll show you these two reverbs. Main reverb, UAD EMT 140. And then this is the snare reverb, which is a sample. Let's go back to 7. All right. So that's the two reverbs. Now, one of the things I do with my reverbs, I also EQ them too to push them back a little bit. So I did have these on, taking out a little the low end and the high end. And that kind of pushes the snare back a little bit on the imaging. One more reverb I like, which is my gated reverb. And on a Chicago tune like this, a gated reverb is the appropriate reverb for the song. You put that into the other two reverbs, and you really got a massive kind of sound going on. So let's listen to it with the overheads. With the overhead reverbs. Now, the other missing piece is my master bus. So, watch what happens when we add the master bus to the snare drum. The first piece of the master bus is the bus compressor, UAD bus compressor, which is basically a SSL copy. Then I have a precision limiter, SSL bus limiter. And the real magic to this whole thing for the drums is going to be, let me go back to 8. Okay, this is the UAD Ampex ATR 102. So it's a tape compression. And you put these three together. And now let's bring in the kick and the overheads. Quite a difference without any bus compression. So, master bus, limiter, and now we put in the tape compression. Now we have one more piece to this, and this really means something with the track in there. Without the track, you don't really hear it as much. So this is what happens to the drums when I turn on the inflator. It gives a little more crispness to it. But if I bring the track in, you'll hear the difference. So let's turn the inflator off. And now I'll turn the track on. So let me set the track up to be turned on. Here we go. No inflator. So, did you hear the difference? That it just popped out, and that's really the magic of my my drum covers for me. Is utilizing that inflator to kind of push the track out there in front a little more, without raising the volume of the track. So that's the Snare EQ. One of the limitations of this new way of recording on my Mac, I just learned, is it only goes 7 minutes. So I probably have 1 more minute to kind of close everything. We will do another one of these, and we'll actually not just do the snare drum, but we'll do kick, snare, and I'll do it from the beginning of a song I can play the music with as well. That's going to be copyright okay. But hopefully you learned something about my work process, my workflow, how I do things in Logic, and hopefully this will trigger some more questions. And I'm looking forward to getting more of your questions, and I'm looking forward to doing more of these videos now that I know how to do this. Even though there was slight limitation, I had to do it 4 times to get to this. Hopefully this worked. So thank you, Adam, for the question. The special Ask Earl Anything. Your questions make the show. Remember that. I'll talk to you next time when we go back in January for the real Ask Earl Anything show.